Stop whatever you're doing right now, because I need to break something you believe in. That final scene of The Invisible Man, the one where Cecilia walks out of the house with the dog, the bag over her shoulder, that half smile creeping across her face. You cheered, didn't you? You felt relief. You thought, finally, she won. Well, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen very carefully, because after this video, you will never be able to watch this movie the same way again. Celebrating that scene means falling into the exact trap the director set for you. That is not a victory. That is a funeral. The woman who escaped that mansion in the very first scene of the film, barefoot, shaking, her heartbeat so loud we can almost hear it through the screen. That woman died. Not all at once. She died slowly, scene by scene, lie by lie, across 2 hours of runtime. And the person who walks out of that house at the end, with the calm stride and the cold eyes, is not Cecilia. It's something else. It's a newborn predator wearing the skin of a survivor. And today, here on Fractured Plot, I'm going to prove to you, using real concepts from forensic psychiatry and trauma psychology, that Adrian Griffin did not lose. Adrian Griffin won. His body is rotting in some morgue, but his mind, his logic, his coldness, all of it is still alive, breathing, walking around out there, inside her. Let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand the tragedy of the ending, you need to understand what Adrian was actually doing from the very first frame. And I'll warn you right now, the answer is not torture. Torture is what an ordinary man would do. An ordinary, cruel, possessive man would hurt the body, break bones, leave visible marks. Adrian never left a single visible mark on anyone. And that is exactly why he is the most terrifying villain of the last decade. Because his project was never about punishing Cecilia for running away. His project was an experiment in psychological contagion. He didn't want to destroy Cecilia. He wanted to rewrite Cecilia. He wanted to take that empathetic, sensitive woman, so full of emotional bonds, and transform her, piece by piece, into a functional copy of himself. And if you think that's a stretch, some internet fan theory, stay with me. Because psychiatry has a name for every single step of what he did. And by the time I'm done putting the pieces together, you're going to feel a chill down your spine when you realize you watched a birth, the birth of a monster, and you applauded at the end. Let's start with the core concept, because it's the key to everything. There's an old, deeply uncomfortable discussion in clinical literature about what some researchers call identification with the aggressor. The term was coined way back by Sandor Ferenczi, one of the first psychoanalysts to seriously study trauma, and later developed by Anna Freud. The idea is disturbing in its simplicity. When a person is subjected to prolonged, inescapable terror with no physical way out, their mind does something desperate to survive. It stops resisting the abuser and starts absorbing him, internalizing his patterns, thinking the way he thinks. At first, as a defense. If I understand how he thinks, I can predict the next blow. But slowly, that map of the enemy stops being a map and becomes the new architecture of the victim's own mind. The victim no longer studies the monster. The victim begins to host the monster. And Adrian, a genius, a man who revolutionized the field of optics, knew this. He wasn't improvising. Every single move he makes in the second act follows a protocol, an incubation protocol. And this is where we need to talk about gaslighting, but not the shallow way the internet talks about it. Everybody uses that word now for any little lie, any couple's disagreement. No. What Adrian does in this film is gaslighting on an industrial scale, a laboratory scale. Gaslighting means making the victim doubt her own perception of reality. And Adrian has the perfect tool for it, because he is literally invisible. Think about what that means in practice. Cecilia feels a presence in the room, but no one is there. The blanket slides off the bed by itself, but no one is there. The frying pan burst into flames in the kitchen, and she was alone in the house. Each event, in isolation, has a mundane explanation. Nerves, distraction, trauma, and that's the sick genius of it. He builds her terror out of bricks that, to anyone else's eyes, look like paranoia. He turns her own sanity into evidence against her. The louder she screams the truth, the crazier she sounds. The more right she is, the more wrong she looks to the world. That, my friend, is not harassment. That is engineering. Reverse engineering of a human mind. But pay attention to the detail that 90% of viewers miss. Adrian almost never attacks Cecilia directly at first. He attacks around her. He attacks the network. Think about the sequence of events. Her portfolio mysteriously vanishes on the day of her job interview. An attack on her financial independence, on the possibility of a future of her own. Then comes the email. That poisonous email sent from her account to her sister, Emily, saying horrible things Cecilia would never say. And Emily believes it. Her sister, her safe harbor, the woman who drove the getaway car in the opening scene, believes those words came from Cecilia, and walks away. Then comes the slap. That scene in the kitchen, when an invisible hand cracks across young Sydney's face, and every eye in the room turns to Cecilia, and James, the cop, her friend, the only decent man in the entire film, the man who opened his own home to her, looks at her with fear, with suspicion, and takes his daughter and leaves. Do you understand what just happened there? In 3 surgical moves, Adrian removed every person who loved Cecilia from her life. Not because he was jealous of them, not just because isolating her made her easier to hurt. It's deeper and darker than that. He needed to prove a thesis to her. The thesis that emotional bonds are vulnerabilities. That love is an open door for invasion. That empathy is the weakness predators use to get inside. Every person he tore out of her life was a lesson. A silent, brutal lesson whose message was, see, Cecilia? See how easy it is? As long as you love someone, you are hackable. As long as you trust, you bleed. The only way to exist safely in this world is to be like me. Alone, cold, invisible. This is what I call the incubator. The entire second act of the film is not a torture session. It's a gestation. Adrian was growing something inside Cecilia's mind, in the dark, in the silence, in the absolute solitude he manufactured. And the most important ingredient of that gestation was helplessness. Psychology has a name for it: learned helplessness. Seligman's famous experiments, where animals subjected to inescapable shocks simply stopped trying to escape, even when escape became possible. The mind learns that resistance is useless and shuts resistance down. But Adrian goes one step beyond helplessness, because when Cecilia's mind hits rock bottom, when she's locked in a psychiatric hospital, sedated, accused of a murder she didn't commit, pregnant by a man she despises, abandoned by everyone, it's precisely at that point of total rupture that something new is born inside her, and it is not hope. Watch the character shift from that moment on. She stops crying. She stops begging people to believe her. She stops trying to convince the world of the truth, and starts calculating. The scene with the hidden pen, the way she attacks, the way she chases the suit down the hospital corridor, that is not desperation. That is a hunt. Her eyes change. Her breathing changes. The Cecilia of Act 1 trembled. The Cecilia of Act 3 takes aim. And if you're feeling a strange discomfort right now, an urge to disagree with me without quite finding the argument, it's because your mind is doing exactly what the audience's mind was trained to do. Defend the happy ending. We need Cecilia to win because the alternative is unbearable. And that is what this channel exists for, to stare at the unbearable without blinking. If you feel like your own sanity is being tested and you want to protect yourself from the invisible monsters of the real world, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Fractured Plot so you don't lose your mind alone. And tell me in the comments if you've ever had someone manipulate your reality until you doubted your own eyes. Because I read every single story, and some of them are scarier than any movie. Now take a deep breath, because we're going into the climax, And this is where my theory stops being interpretation and becomes evidence. Let's reconstruct Cecilia's final decision, step by step, with clinical coldness. At the end of the film, Adrian's brother Tom is exposed as the accomplice. Adrian is found tied up in the basement of his own mansion, playing the role of a kidnapping victim. And the police, the system, all of society swallows his version. Cecilia knows he will never be punished. She knows the law cannot reach men like him. Up to this point, fine. Up to this point, any of us would understand her rage, her sense of injustice, her certainty that the system failed. But now, watch closely what she chooses to do. She doesn't go to the press. She doesn't search for evidence of the suit, which she knows exists. She doesn't try to expose the fraud. She calls him, accepts a dinner invitation, puts on a dress, puts on lipstick, sits down at that man's table, looks into his eyes, and conducts an entire conversation with a single objective, extracting a confession for James to hear through the phone. And when the confession doesn't come, when Adrian, too clever, denies everything with the smile of a man who knows he's being recorded, she excuses herself, goes to the bathroom, and puts on the suit. Stop. Freeze that image in your mind. The victim, putting on her abuser's instrument of torture, voluntarily, methodically. Do you grasp the symbolic weight of that? That suit is not just technology. That suit is the physical embodiment of a philosophy. Adrian's philosophy. The suit is the material answer to a moral question. What would you do if no one could see you? That question is older than cinema. Plato asked it more than 2,000 years ago in the Republic, with the myth of the ring of Gyges. A shepherd finds a ring that makes him invisible, and the philosopher's question is, does an invisible man remain just? Or is justice merely the fear of getting caught? Adrian answered that question with his entire life. Invisible, he became a cruel god, without rules, without limits, without consequences. And now? Cecilia puts on the same answer. She walks into that bathroom as a woman, and walks out as an idea. The idea that the rules no longer apply to her. And then comes the scene everyone cheered for in theaters. Adrian sitting at the table, alone, and suddenly his own hand, moved by an invisible force, picks up the knife and cuts his throat, right in front of the security camera, framed perfectly to look like suicide. And Cecilia reappears seconds later, screaming, performing shock, performing despair, with a theatrical precision that should freeze your blood. Because think about it. Where did she learn that? Where did that woman learn to exploit the blind spot of a security camera? Where did she learn to fabricate a crime scene, to plant a narrative, to manipulate the perception of everyone who will ever watch that footage? She learned it from him. She is running, move by move, Adrian's playbook. The man who spent the entire film fabricating false realities to frame her, dies inside a false reality fabricated by her. And I know that sounds like poetic justice. I know part of you wants to stand up and applaud, but psychiatry doesn't applaud. Psychiatry observes and takes notes. And what it notes is this. The patient did not kill in self-defense. There was no immediate threat in that moment. She planned, dressed for the occasion, executed, staged, and lied to the only person who was ever truly on her side. Because there's that detail. James. James is outside, listening to everything through the phone. And when Cecilia walks out of the house and meets him, James asks what happened, and listen to what she answers. She looks at him, at her friend, the cop, the man who represents whatever is left of law and decency in this story, and tells him Adrian killed himself, and adds with a clean voice, with a serene face. Surprisingly, that's how he went. She lies. To James. To his face. And James knows. You can see it on the actor's face that James knows and chooses not to know. And in that small, silent pact of complicity, the film shows you the contagion spreading beyond her. Because now James carries a lie too. Adrian's disease just infected one more soul. Let's go deeper clinically, because this is where the real horror lives. There is a serious debate in forensic psychiatry about the extent to which sociopathic traits can be acquired. Not inherited, not born, but built by extreme trauma. We know from decades of research on complex post-traumatic stress disorder that prolonged trauma physically reorganizes the brain. The amygdala, the threat detection center, becomes hypertrophied, hyperactive, seeing danger everywhere. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for regulation, for morality, for the brakes, loses density. And empathy circuits can be literally suppressed as a defense mechanism, because feeling another person's pain in a war zone is a luxury that costs you your survival. Now apply that to Cecilia, months, maybe years, inside that fortress mansion, monitored, controlled, abused. Then weeks being hunted by a ghost the entire world insisted didn't exist. Her brain didn't go through a trauma. Her brain went through a renovation. And the architect of that renovation had a name, a face, and a plan. Because this is the part that turns the film from a thriller into a tragedy. Adrian wanted this. I keep insisting on this point because it is the heart of the theory. If Adrian's goal was simply to get Cecilia back, he had 1,000 easier ways. If it was simply to punish her, he could have killed her in Act 1. Invisible, untouchable, case closed. But he doesn't. He prolongs. He doses the terror the way a chemist doses a compound. He destroys exactly the structures that supported her old identity. The sister, the friend, the career, the credibility, the freedom, and leaves intact the structures that serve the new identity. Her intelligence, her capacity for planning, her willpower. He wasn't demolishing a house. He was demolishing the rooms he didn't need to renovate the rest in his own image. That line he says to her at the final dinner. It's his testament. He tells her she's different now. And he says it with admiration, with pride. The pride of a creator gazing at his creation. He looks at that cold woman sitting across from him and recognizes his own reflection. And in the final seconds of his life, when the blade touches his throat, I swear to you, I cannot stop imagining that some part of that sick man died satisfied. Because his death was the final test of the experiment, her graduation. The proof that the empathy had been successfully removed. You only kill in cold blood, when the blood has already gone cold. And there's an element of this story I saved on purpose until now, because it is the most disturbing of all. The pregnancy. Halfway through the film, inside the psychiatric hospital, Cecilia discovers she is pregnant. And she discovers it in the worst possible way, through a test she never asked for, announced by strangers, and immediately used as a bargaining chip. Because look at what Tom, the lawyer brother, does with that information. He sits across from her and offers a deal. Adrian wants you back. Adrian wants the baby. Cooperate, and all of this goes away. Do you see what the pregnancy represents inside the experiment? It's not love. It's not family. It's a biological anchor. Adrian sabotaged her birth control. This is stated explicitly in the film. He was swapping out her pills without her knowledge, which means he planted inside her body a chain that no escape could ever break. She could flee the mansion, flee the state, flee the country, but she could not flee her own womb. In the literature on domestic violence, this has a name: reproductive coercion. One of the most documented and least discussed forms of control. Abusers sabotage contraception precisely for this. To create a permanent bond, an internal hostage, a guarantee that the victim will never be completely free. Now think about what that adds to the final scene. The woman walking out of that house smiling is pregnant by the monster whose throat she just cut. Adrian's legacy isn't just in her mind and in her bag. It is growing inside her body, cell by cell. And the film never tells us what she intends to do about it. And that silence is deafening. Because whatever the answer is, that child will be raised by a woman who learned to solve problems by putting on a suit and cutting throats. There is no version of this story where the cycle simply ends. There is only the version where it transfers to the next generation, the way it always transfers. And since we've opened the basement of this story, let's talk about Tom. Because Adrian's brother is living proof, inside the film itself, that my theory works. Who is Tom? The younger brother, the lawyer, the doormat, a grown, educated, wealthy man, who obeys Adrian the way a beaten dog obeys its owner. At one point, he even confides in Cecilia. He tells her he knows what it's like, that Adrian did it to him too, that he knows the control from the inside. Tom is the experiment's first test subject, the rough draft. He is what happens when Adrian's method only half works, a victim who absorbs the abuser's logic without absorbing his strength. Tom learned to lie, to manipulate, to fabricate crime scenes. He wears the suit. He attacks a house with a teenage girl inside, but he does all of it in service of his brother, as an extension of his brother, with no will of his own. He is the incomplete contagion. Now compare Tom to the Cecilia of the finale. She absorbed the method and the autonomy. She serves no one. She is the finished version of what Tom could only be in draft form. Adrian spent his life trying to create copies of himself. He failed with his brother, and tragically, gloriously, obscenely, he succeeded with his wife. The film hands you the before and after of the experiment on the same screen, and nobody notices. Let's linger inside that hospital for a moment longer, because the institution sequence is the most underrated stretch of the entire film, and it's where the transformation actually completes. Think about where Cecilia is, psychologically, when those doors lock behind her. She has been framed for the murder of her own sister. She watched Emily's throat be cut in a crowded restaurant, watched the knife be placed into her own hand, watched a room full of witnesses see exactly what Adrian designed them to see. Her grief and her guilt and her terror are all fused into one unbearable mass, and the world's response is to sedate her and lock her up. This is the total collapse of every system that is supposed to protect a human being. Family, gone. Friendship, gone. The law turned against her. Medicine turned into a cage. And here is the detail I need you to sit with. It is precisely inside that cage, at the absolute bottom, that Cecilia becomes dangerous for the first time. Watch the scene where Tom slides the pen across the table with the agreement to sign. She takes the pen, and she doesn't sign. She keeps it. She hides it. In that tiny silent gesture, a new operating system boots up. The old Cecilia would have wept, pleaded, signed. The new one inventories the room and identifies a weapon. And then comes the moment that should be studied in film schools as a portrait of transformation. Alone in her room, she doesn't stab at the empty air in panic. She thinks. She baits. She uses her own body, her own visible despair, as a lure to make the invisible thing reveal itself. And when it does, she drives that pen into it with a precision and a savagery that comes out of nowhere. Except it doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from him. Weeks of being hunted taught her how a hunter thinks. Every trap he set became a template stored in her nervous system. The hospital was supposed to be where they buried her mind. Instead, it's where the new mind finished loading. She walks into that institution as the last fragments of a victim, and she escapes it as something the film never dares to name. And notice what the escape itself costs everyone around her. Hospital guards, orderlies, security staff, ordinary working people, beaten, thrown, left bleeding on the floor by a force they cannot see, all collateral damage in a war between two people. And Cecilia runs past those bodies without a flicker of hesitation. I'm not saying she had a choice in that moment. I'm saying the film is showing you, deliberately, the shrinking radius of her empathy. In Act 1, she flinched at everything. She carried the weight of everyone around her. By the hospital escape, other people's pain has become scenery. That is not a moral judgment of a fictional woman. That is the clinical arc the movie is drawing in plain sight. Empathy doesn't vanish in one dramatic moment. It erodes, scene by scene, corridor by corridor, body by body, until the night she can watch a man's throat open 3 feet away from her and calmly walk to her mark, hit her cue, and scream on schedule. And the film knows. I have to give Leigh Whannell, the director, this credit, because nothing I've said here is an accident. His camera tells this dark story the entire time, running underneath the empowering one. Notice how the film shoots empty space. Those long, lingering frames of bedroom corners, hallways, unoccupied chairs, training your eye to hunt for threats where there is nothing. The film performs a mild version on you, the viewer, of what Adrian performs on Cecilia. It makes you paranoid. It teaches you to distrust emptiness. 2 hours of runtime and you walk out of the theater checking the corners of your own house. That is contagion, operating on you in real time. And in the final scene, when Cecilia walks toward the camera, her framing is identical to framings used for Adrian at the beginning. The visual language of the predator transferred to her. The director told you the truth the entire film, in the margins, in the framing, in the grammar of the image, and bet that you would prefer the lie of the triumphant score. And he won that bet. The entire world walked out of the theater celebrating. Now let me take you somewhere even more uncomfortable. Because this story is not about a science fiction suit. This film is a mirror, and its reflection is inside millions of homes at this very moment. Psychological contagion is real. Domestic violence statistics show a pattern that professionals in the field know all too well. Victims of prolonged abuse, when they don't receive treatment, carry the learned patterns into their next relationships, sometimes as victims again, and sometimes, and this is the part nobody likes to say out loud, as abusers. The cycle of abuse is not a line, it is a spiral. The father who beats raised the son who beats. The mother who manipulates raised the daughter who manipulates. Not always. It is not destiny, it is not a sentence, but it is gravity. A force pulling downward, and resisting it requires the one thing Cecilia never receives at any point in the film: help. Notice that. At no moment in this story does anyone offer Cecilia real treatment. The psychiatric hospital, where she's committed, is not a place of healing. It's a prison in disguise, bankrolled by Adrian's money. Her therapy was the war. Her treatment was the hunt. And a mind that heals itself in war does not heal. It arms itself. Think about how many Cecilias you know. People who walked out of destructive relationships and came back different, harder, more closed off, colder. And we applaud it, don't we? We call it growth, empowerment. She doesn't take anything from anyone anymore. He doesn't trust a soul now, and good for him. We celebrate the armor without ever asking what had to die for it to grow. Because there is a brutal, clinical difference between setting boundaries and abandoning empathy, between protecting yourself and striking first, between never being a victim again and being ready to become the abuser. The line between those things is thin, gray, and it gets crossed in silence, without ceremony, usually without the person even noticing. Cecilia crossed that line in a bathroom, putting on a suit. Real people cross it in small decisions. The first strategic lie, the first justified manipulation, the first cruelty explained away as self-defense. And on the other side of that line, the view is strange, because on the other side, you look back and feel no guilt. You feel efficiency. So let's face the final question. The question this film whispers and no one wants to answer. What happens to Cecilia after the credits roll? Picture her 1 year from now. She has a military-grade invisibility suit in her bag and the certainty, tested and proven, that she can kill without consequences. She has a fortune because, yes, she inherited Adrian's money before his death, $5 million. Another detail everyone forgets. The monster's money funding the creature's new life. She has a secret binding her to James in a pact of silence. And she has, engraved into the depths of her renovated brain, a lesson Adrian spent 2 full acts teaching her. When the system fails you, and it will fail you, put on the suit. What are the odds that woman never opens that bag again? At the first grave injustice, the first man who threatens her, the first obstacle the law can't solve, the bag is right there. The suit is right there. And the moral precedent has already been set. The first murder is a border. The second is a road. And that is the absolute tragedy this film hides beneath its happy ending. Adrian Griffin wanted to live forever, and he pulled it off, not in flesh, in pattern, in method, in legacy. He looked at the most empathetic woman in his life and said, "I will make you the proof that empathy is a weakness." And he delivered. Every cheer at that ending, every round of applause at that scene, every person who left the theater saying she won, is his experiment succeeding again, audience by audience, year after year. Because the contagion didn't stop with Cecilia. The contagion reached you. You rooted for the murder. You smiled with her smile. For 2 seconds in that theater seat, you put on the suit too, and you liked it. If this theory just destroyed the way you see this film, hit that like button right now. Confirm your subscription to Fractured Plot and turn on the notification bell before you become the very thing you fear most. Because every week I cut open a movie you love and show you what's rotting inside. And trust me, you'd rather find out with me than find out alone, in the dark, the night the blanket slides off your bed. And before we close, let me leave you with a map. Because theory without application is just entertainment. And this channel does not exist to entertain you. It exists to vaccinate you. If this story touched something deep, if you recognize pieces of it in your own life, or in the life of someone you love, pay attention to the signs of real-world contagion. The first sign is progressive isolation, when the people who love you begin disappearing from your life one by one, and every disappearance seems to have a reasonable explanation, a silly fight, a misunderstanding, a strange email. Distrust the choreography. Accidents don't stand in line. The second sign is chronic doubt of your own perception, when you start needing outside validation to believe what your own eyes saw, when you apologize for things you don't remember doing, when the phrase, "it's all in your head," becomes the soundtrack of your life. You are not going crazy. You are being edited. And the third sign, the quietest and the gravest, is when you notice you're becoming like the person who hurts you, when you catch yourself using his tactics, her punishing silence, the calculated coldness. And a voice inside you whispers that it's only self-defense, that you learned from the best, that no one will ever catch you off guard again. That voice is the suit being offered to you. And the difference between you and Cecilia is that you can still refuse it. There is still time to seek real help, real therapy, real people, because the mind that heals with others comes back whole, and the mind that heals alone, at war, comes back armed. Sit with this final image now. Cecilia walking into the night, light on her feet, the dead man's dog on the leash, the dead man's suit in her bag, the dead man's money in her account, the dead man's smile on her face. Tell me, honestly, who exactly survived that movie? Because I look at that scene and I don't see a free woman. I see a funeral in motion, and I see an invisible man, more invisible than ever, walking down the street inside another skin, laughing at all of us. Cecilia Cass died in that mansion. What walked out the door was Adrian's masterpiece. And the most terrifying part of it all is that she doesn't even know. She thinks she won, just like you did, until tonight. Sleep well, if you can, knowing that the most dangerous monsters are not the ones we cannot see. They're the ones we applaud.